Welcome back, friends of Dentro La Storia. It's time for our coffee, so I hope you've prepared your cup, your mug, whatever you like. If you don't like coffee or prefer another drink, that's no problem because we have a welcome guest. Actually, it's a return since it's not the first time she's been with us. I'm talking about Valentina De Santis, a great author. In the past, she already told us an incredible yet true story, the one about the death ray. Today she's back with another one. A great achievement, another book full of revelations. No, I don't want to give away too much. Anyway, welcome back and thank you for being with us again.
Thank you. Hi, Federico. Hi, nice to see everyone. Thank you for having me.
So, I don't want to take up your time or steal the spotlight, so please explain to us what the focus of your latest research is and what it has produced. I know there's a new book that just came out.
Yes, exactly. So look, as you know, I have access to the Vatican Apostolic Archive. And in these years that I've been going to the archive, because by now it's become almost a daily routine, I've managed to find some unpublished documents about a story that gives you a lot to think about. I'll say right away that the documents I found are not definitive documents, so they don't put an end to the story, to the story I'm about to tell you, but they add an important piece. They open up a new scenario, a new direction to search for Mussolini's famous crates. Now, when I entered the archive, I found this file that summarizes the 12 crates of Benito Mussolini. I wrote a book with exactly this title. Why? Because it talks about a hypothesis regarding the location of these crates. So let's start from the beginning. The document I found is signed by Montini, so the substitute Secretary of State, who writes first a draft, then an official letter to Bishop Marchi of Como, and then we have the response from Bishop Marchi to Montini. And what does it say? Here we have an incredible revelation because Montini, on January 14, 1946, writes a draft saying they should write to Bishop Marchi to verify the presence of 12 crates belonging to Benito Mussolini inside the Collegio Gallio. Now, Collegio Gallio was already famous on its own. I mean, we already know it historically, even if only partially, not in any major way, because it hosted Vittorio Mussolini. And in this letter, in this draft and in the official letter, Bishop Marchi is asked to verify the presence of 12 crates belonging to Benito Mussolini, containing documents, including documents in his own hand. So Montini is very clear. And Montini also writes in the draft that an Allied officer has informed the Secretariat of State here. So in the draft, Montini mentions the name of an American captain, Captain John Norton. John Norton, who went to the Vatican to confer with the Pope. So I read this file, and you can well imagine the emotion of discovering something like this. And I continued with the investigation because, in fact, this file is held by the Secretariat of State. I went to look for John Norton because John Norton had spoken with the Pope. And in fact, there is a file on John Norton who had a papal audience the day before. So on January 13, 1946, John Norton was received in a special audience by the Pope. The next day, Montini immediately took action to verify this information and wrote to Bishop Marchi. He also wrote to deliver it by hand through Monsignor Pignodoli, who was a close collaborator of Montini. So Montini writes this official letter, gives it to Pignodoli, and Pignodoli has to deliver it by hand, given, let's say, the confidentiality and also the sensitive material he was transporting. He had it delivered by hand to Bishop Marchi. Bishop Marchi replied on February 16, 1946, saying, "Your letter reached me this morning, so it was delivered to him in the morning." And he replies, "I can assure your excellency that here at Gallio there is absolutely nothing." So this answer is, let's say, final. It seems like a response that, in a way, wants to put an end to this correspondence. Now, there are some key points that I explained clearly in the book. First of all, John Norton. Maybe it's not an omission, but I didn't find anything about John Norton. I searched the Nara archives. I tried to reconstruct a profile of this person, but it's very complicated. Why? Because in the file of papal audiences, when a person is to be received by the Pope, there is a whole form filled out at the beginning. So there's the first name, the middle name, the last name, where they're staying in Rome, their contact phone number in Rome, and the person who introduces them. So there's always someone who introduces you before you see the Pope, but for John Norton, there's nothing. There's only a little piece of paper with something written in pencil. Here, the first and last name. I don't know where he's staying in Rome or the phone number. And I don't know who introduced him. And above all, what intrigued me was the fact that he doesn't have a middle name, so John Norton is just John. By the way, that's very strange. Very strange indeed. Americans always have a middle name. Exactly. And then it was also a strong way to identify someone. I mean, now it's not used as much anymore, it's already less common. But before, the middle name was a way to reinforce one's identity. But in this case, we don't have that. We only have the first name and the last name. So I also suspect that this information might be false. But these are just suspicions. So we don't really know who this person was. Then Montini actually in the letter and also in the draft is different from the official letter. Let's say it's like a rough draft that Montini prepared before writing the official letter. On the back of the draft, Montini writes. He actually writes John Norton Blevio Villa da Riva, so he gives very specific references. However, Montini makes some grammatical mistakes, that is, oversights. Because instead of writing Gallio with a double L, he writes Gallio with GL. So when he writes, he makes some spelling mistakes. And Norton is also written with an H. So Norton in the English way. Whereas on the audience file, Norton is written without an H. Then the Bishop of Machi replies to Montini. And in the reply, he says Gallio with two L's. So in the correct form. So implicitly, he is correcting him and guiding him toward the right terminology. What does this make us understand? It makes us understand that Montini didn't know what he was talking about, actually, because he had only heard this name verbally. And I don't know if Montini was present at the audience while John Norton was there. But he was definitely told about it verbally, so at the moment he was told, he made this mistake, these grammatical mistakes, which makes me think that Montini wasn't familiar with this matter. So the Vatican didn't know about these crates. They didn't know about this matter. In fact, they immediately took action. I mean, if the day before an American captain comes to talk to the Pope on a Sunday and on Monday Montini is already writing and rather alarmed, then something isn't right. Another thing, above all, we also have to mention how an American officer, an American captain says Gallio. Actually, Americans don't have the GL sound phonetically. They just don't have it. So even in this case, something doesn't add up. I'm talking strictly in phonetic terms here. After that, we have Machi's response. Machi's response comes on February 16th. Now, I understand that there could have been a communication problem because we're in 46, so maybe communications were slow. There were some issues to get from Rome to Como, but replying to a letter almost a month later is very strange. It makes you think, because clearly replying with "I received it this morning" means that almost a month has passed. And we don't really know what kind of journey this letter went through. If it really was delivered a month later, if Maki really received it that morning, and exactly what happened at that moment. Clearly, these are only hypotheses, suspicions. But in my opinion, Collegio Gallio was the key point because, as we already said before at the beginning, Vittorio Mussolini and other relatives were hosted at Gallio. And when he arrived at Gallio, he arrived with a letter from Schuster, and the rector was Ferro, Giovanni Ferro, the rector. What happened? So Benito Mussolini Sr. arrived in Como on April 25th at the prefecture. He was also followed by his son, so by his entire close entourage, and then they continued on to Menaggio. But Vittorio Mussolini did not continue, so the Mussolini family split up. And Vittorio was hosted at the Gallio. Now, it's possible that Vittorio Mussolini brought with him at least some of the documents. Yes, I consider it highly plausible. Why? Because if an American captain comes to speak with the Pope, it means the news is certain. And above all, the Americans. This captain tells Montini exactly what's inside. There are the handwritten documents of Benito Mussolini, so those crates were also inspected to say what's inside, so they were really in there. Clearly, I can't be absolutely certain, but I consider it 90 to 95% possible because clearly Vittorio Mussolini was there and some relatives were there too. Then Vittorio leaves in November and Rector Ferro leaves as well. There's a changeover even at the top of the college. And Pio Bianchini takes over. He is the next rector. When Pio Bianchini takes over in November, something happens. So the Americans enter the college. So this is the reconstruction I've put together. They enter the college, they inspect the crates. They wait until after the Christmas holidays, and right after the Christmas holidays, they go to the Pope. So something happened during this time. So in November, the rector changes. In November, Vittorio leaves. He runs away, and another rector takes over, and the Americans. So during that period, something definitely happened. Then we have no further information about these crates. So then we enter the world of speculation, the realm of speculation, because clearly we need to understand if there were any copies. There were several. If there were 12 crates, if there were more, if they were stolen, if they were partially stolen, if they were copied, because the American captain, he says that these crates, the Americans prefer, that the Vatican keeps them and they make photographic copies. So the other hypothesis could be that not having received a response from the church, the Americans enter the college and they take away the crates, with the result that
I want to ask you two things. First, the role of Cardinal Schuster, because we know he was the last intermediary between Mussolini and the National Liberation Committee to find a, let's say, peaceful solution. And second, the role of Montini, the future Pope Paul VI, because we know that Montini at the time was Secretary of State, but he had strong connections with his native Lombardy, and on top of that, he was politically active in what would become the Reconstruction phase of Italy. 1946 is the year of the Republic versus Monarchy referendum. De Gasperi's government is already in place. Who is a trusted man of Montini? So these two figures, how did you address them in your book?
So, in this first phase, both Schuster and Montini don't seem very involved. I mean, Schuster, he is simply the one who lets Vittorio Avgalio in, while Montini is the one who is caught off guard, surprised by this news. The important thing to highlight is that all these people involved, so Montini, Macchi, and Pignodoli, who delivers by hand, after this incident, they all keep their roles. So obviously no one made a mistake, or at least not a serious one, such that there were consequences afterward. Let me give you an example. If Maki had made a mistake, like responding after a month to a letter coming from the Secretariat of State, maybe there could have been consequences. The same goes for Pignodoli. How can you deliver a letter after a month and not face any consequences? Apparently, that's how things were done. Everything was straightforward, everything was clear, everything was planned, so there were no consequences. Actually, the book goes on, where I analyze what happened in 54, and there, yes, we have Schuster who forcefully enters the discussion, and also Montini. Because in 54, the De Toma scandal comes out, that is, Enrico De Toma selling fake documents, among them the correspondence between Mussolini and Churchill, to the weekly magazines Oggi and Candido. So a very big scandal breaks out, very intense, and these documents are also transcribed in my book, where we have Montini's reaction. We can read Montini's reaction precisely from the Vatican's point of view. So inside the book, I transcribed how Montini reacts to this news, to these events, what had happened. De Toma begins to speak. Enrico De Toma, who was part of Mussolini's entourage, he starts saying that he has documents that involve De Gasperi, Montini, and the Vatican, pretty much everyone, and the Mussolini correspondence as well. The weekly magazines Candido and Oggi start buying this material and publishing it. So they are very excited about this scoop, right? Because clearly it's a big scoop. as soon as they come out. So these documents are published in several installments. As soon as they come out, pandemonium breaks out immediately. So because one of the first letters that was published was the letter from de Gasperi, who asks the Allies to bomb Rome so that the population would rise up against the Germans. Now, I checked the file in the Vatican about the bombings of Rome, and it exists. And I can assure you that inside that file, the Pope wants to defend Rome at all costs. He does everything he can to protect Rome so that it won't be bombed. And so this letter comes out where de Gasperi is accused. It's a serious accusation against de Gasperi. So there's a trial right away, immediately, in a summary trial. And Guarischi, who was the director of Candido, is convicted. He is convicted. And he doesn't appeal. He serves a year in prison. De Toma, on the other hand, escapes to Brazil. From Brazil, he keeps claiming that one part was false, but another part was true. So here some rather unsettling scenarios open up. Why? Because by his own admission, some documents were fake. But was the content fake, or was it just the form that was fake? Because the form was definitely fake. I mean, you could see it by comparing them. There are analyses that were done. They all used the same typewriter, for example, so the form was definitely fake. But what about the content? Was it true or was it false? I mean, the information inside those poorly transcribed documents, was it true or was it false? We don't know for sure. And especially considering the fact that later, still in the Vatican, I found a document, actually two documents. One, where the Secretariat of State asks the Italian embassy to the Holy See for information about the Toma trial. So, about how things were developing, how they were evolving. Investigations continue. The Ministry of Justice, as it was then called, responds. They respond to the fact that the issue had been raised in the Giornale d'Italia. The Giornale d'Italia published a report saying that fake seals had been found in de Toma's safety deposit box in Switzerland. So the Vatican asked the Ministry of Justice for information about this report, and the Ministry of Justice responds that the report was false because no fake seals were found inside de Toma's safety deposit box in Switzerland. Now, saying that no fake seals were found is ambiguous. I mean, you should have answered, no seals were found, neither real nor fake. No seals were found. You need to be a bit more specific on this topic because otherwise it's ambiguous. Also, because then the letter ends with this information. Secret. So it was something really very confidential, truly secret. But in fact, this document notes next to the statement to keep asking for information because evidently the answer is not exhaustive. So this scandal continues. Because then, at a certain point, I discovered another document from someone named Errani, a priest, Giovannino Errani. Giovannino Errani is a mostly unknown figure, but he is still part of Mussolini's entourage. What does this priest write to the Vatican? He writes that he has seen the correspondence, he has had it in his hands, and he personally knows the person, the officer, who still had it in 1954. And he says that the correspondence contains names, 50 names, of compromised personalities, and Cardinal Schuster is heavily compromised. So Errani emphasizes that we can sit here and say it's false all we want. I'm paraphrasing here. A bit lighter, but the letter was very serious because Errani was worried. The spirit with which he writes this letter is one of concern towards the Holy See, especially towards Cardinal Schuster. And then he continues saying that a film was being planned about the correspondence to be released in all the languages of the world. So this letter is completely unpublished. It highlights how there were so many people involved, maybe too many, because it made it hard to pass it off as fake. I mean, here everyone was involved, the top officials of the Vatican, of the Italian state. It was, I don't want to say it was impossible for it to be fake, but there was too much going on behind this matter. Also because the matter doesn't end here, because then I went to the Central State Archive of Rome. There is Goreski. There is the file on Goreski. And Goreski, in prison, received the request from the Austrian ambassador for Italy to grant a visit in prison to the publisher Müller, who wanted to talk with Goreski. Now, Miller and Guareschi already knew each other because Guareschi, being the screenwriter of Don Camillo and Pepone, had already prepared some episodes in a foreign language, so Miller was already collaborating with Guareschi from this point of view. However, the question is, a man who is in prison, professionally speaking, is finished, because then Guareschi had serious problems at work, obviously. Because if you go to prison for defaming De Gasperi, it's difficult to continue working. However, Otto Müller still asks to meet with Guareschi to carry forward a project that, in prison, was written precisely to create a performance in all the languages of the world. And it is exactly as Rani had written in his letter. And to get the Austrian ambassador involved is quite a big deal. It was standard procedure because to be able to speak with an inmate, you needed the ambassador. So the request is formal, it's correct. But which publisher decides to continue a collaboration with a man in prison who, professionally speaking, is finished, especially if you travel from Austria to come to Italy? So, in my opinion, clearly, this is my conclusion. There was something more to it to talk about with him. And so the book ends with this document. And clearly, it's not a conclusion. We don't have the conclusion. I didn't find the correspondence, unfortunately. I didn't find it either.
And it's the classic open ending. It could be.
It's classic. Yes, there's also a plot twist by Irani that comes in, that turns the scene around and you feel it.
One last thing that came to my mind for our last few minutes. So this mysterious Captain Macola Morco, we understood he exists, but it's not certain that was his name, and so on and so forth. It made me wonder, in those months in Rome, there was a character moving around. And some say he works for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, and others say he works for the Counterintelligence Corps, military counterintelligence. He's an American. His name is James Jesus Angleton. He's involved in the rescue of Prince Borghese. He's involved in getting Pripka out of the country. He's Catholic, very Catholic, anti-communist, a friend of De Gasperi. He could be this mysterious captain.
Look, I don't know. In my opinion, I don't know. I don't know how well known he was. I mean, if you go to the Pope with a fake name, it's because nobody knows you. I'm talking about your face. You're not someone people can recognize. So I don't know if this Angleton was a well-known person in Vatican circles, in Roman circles. Because if my name is Angleton and I introduce myself as Norton, someone who recognizes me might say, "What are you talking about?" So I really can't say precisely. In my opinion, he was a figure. He was probably a captain. Because when you move up in the hierarchy, everything becomes much more complicated, more official. You move into formal diplomatic channels. So, and it's also difficult to conceal your identity, so you're probably not that high in rank and you're an unknown person. I don't even know if he was actually an American. Because if you say Gaglio with the Giel, because Montini writes Gaglio, so I don't know now what happened during the transcription. If there was another person involved or if Montini actually heard this word. But if an American pronounces Gallio, then either you're not American or your mother is Italian or there's another explanation that I don't know. But the fact that he might not have been American could also be an option. But I don't know how well he spoke Italian, if he spoke Italian at all. We don't have the content of the audience or these details. It just says there's an omission. Do you know why I mentioned Angleton? Because when he was young, not even 20 years old, he moved to Milan with his family and learned Italian. That's all it says.
Do you know why I mentioned Angleton? Because when he was young, not even 20 years old, he moved to Milan with his family and learned Italian. By the way, at that time, he was moving around with the army. The highest rank of junior officer is captain, so it's click in the then.
Now that will be my next research project.
Whistle, yes. Great, I planted the idea in your head, so very good.
Thank you. See, exchanging ideas is always constructive in the end.
So, Valentina, I thank you very much. Let's remind everyone that your book is already available on the Amazon platform as well. For those subscribed to the newsletter, you'll receive it with all the details, the info sheet, the purchase link, and everything else. I thank you again for your time and willingness. Thank you. Documentary research is extremely valuable because if there weren't researchers like you who dig deep, we wouldn't be able to discover so many other things. I hope to have you as my guest again, maybe for a new investigative book.
Let's hope so.
Hey, and what else can I say? Thank you again for everything, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you all. Bye. Have a good day. Thank you.